Ediscovery 101. We're just going to be going through a lot of the terminology, high level, getting on the same page here today. Just quickly want to go over the agenda. So as I stated, a lot of what we're learning is just going to be that vocabulary that goes along with the e-discovery process. But one of the most important things we'll be understanding is ESI protocols and data collection. After we discuss the collection of data, we'll talk about importing the data and technical aspects that get thrown around there. We will also go over the importance of setting yourself up for success in the relevance review phase once you have your data in your database by sharing some best practices, tips and tricks there. And we'll explain the differences in the different types of productions that you can produce in Next Point. So let's get started at the beginning. What is e-discovery? I'll go ahead and read the definition word for word so that I don't butcher it. E-discovery is the process of identifying, preserving, collecting, preparing, reviewing, and producing electronically stored information in the context of a legal or investigative process. So I know that's a lot of action verbs for what's going to be going on from the beginning to the end of the e-discovery process. But a lot of things that we're going to be able to do in here. So quickly, before we move to the next slide, I just want to point out those highlighted words. Electronically stored information. So if you recall that we'll be discussing just from a slide ago, ESI protocols, and you were wondering what ESI stood for, it's just electronically stored information. So this is the EDRM model, otherwise known as the Electronic Discovery Reference Model. The way that I like to look at this is that these are all the steps that go into e-discovery. You start out with the information management by identifying the data that could in any way be even remotely important to the case that you're working on. After that, you identify the information that you want. You will move on to preserving and collecting it. From there, you will want to process, review, and analyze that information. And this is where you'll most likely be spending the vast majority of your time in the EDRM model before you actually produce that information like to opposing counsel. So this dotted box is what our discovery suite encompasses in the e-discovery process. And then finally, you end up presenting that information. And this is where your transition over into our litigation suite would take place. We'll talk about the differences between discovery and litigation on a very high level today in a couple of slides. But one of the most important things that I want to point out about this model is down at the bottom of the slide. It shows that you start out with a large amount of information at the beginning of the process that may or may not be relevant to your case. And as you work your way to the right of this model, you start to cull the volume of that information down, and it becomes much more relevant and targeted to what you're looking for. So by the time you reach the presentation stage, you'll have an exponentially smaller set of data that is highly relevant to you and your case. So you can see here, these are all of the areas that Next Point that's highlighted. These are the areas that Next Point is able to help in the EDRM process. And the thing about the model is that this is something that everyone in the industry uses. It's been around since 2005. Personally, on a personal note, 2005 was a great year. That was when my White Sox won the World Series. And then I went to my first playoff game this year and watched them get destroyed by the Astros, who are now in the World Series. Anyways, that has nothing to do with e-discovery, just still bitter. But this model has been around since 2005, so it's been a while. And it was created as sort of a repeatable process to improve e-discovery standards. Something to point out here is that generally speaking, when talking about information management and identifying data, that comes from like corporations and businesses creating their own processes and protocols for how they go about storing information. Next Point can come in at the preserve and collect phase, but this isn't necessarily something that is supported by the software. This is one of our professional services that we provide. The software really comes into play once you have all of the data and you want to start culling it down by reviewing and analyzing it to then produce and potentially present the information in court if it makes it that far.